Building trust in your processes. What I mean by that is trust in the process maps, the process documentation that you create. So just to have a bit of a discussion about why is it important that we build trust in the processes, a little bit about how we do it generally, so not specifically to Skore, but what are the sorts of approaches that we can take to build trust in the processes once we've obviously established why we need to do that. And then what I want to do is take you through some of the key features in Skore that help us achieve that. So the first question, do we even need people to trust our processes? Like, why would we want that? Why is that important to us? In a change situation, but what about where it's sort of business as usual? What's the problem if people don't trust the processes and documentation? What happens? The way I sort of thought about it is if you don't trust the processes that have been defined, then you're not going to follow them. And therefore, it's like, how do you even know if you're doing things in the right way? If it's a compliance environment, you're then creating all sorts of risk. You might get into trouble for not doing it in the right way. You're probably going to be less efficient, although that's not always the case. Sometimes processes are designed to be inefficient. Without trust in the processes, people don't follow the standard process because they just don't bother. They just don't bother going to look at the processes. If you don't trust it, then it's very difficult to understand the cause of failure. So if something goes wrong in the process because people don't trust it and they're not following it, then you've basically got to start from scratch to uncover what's really gone wrong. Without documentation, improvements tend to be uncoordinated and tactical, but uncoordinated. Improving a part of a process without really understanding the wider context is that whole thing about squeezing a balloon and it with your hands, and then it squeezes out, it sort of balloons out somewhere else. And the amount of times that we've seen over the years projects where people have tried to fix one thing in a process and all they've done is push the problem up or downstream, and it's impacting someone else, and they don't always understand where it comes from. It's really difficult to understand the impact of changes. So whether you're the person initiating the change, what's the impact that's going to have on other parts of the organization, or you're the person being impacted by the change, and then it creates fear and mistrust and all of those sorts of things. So ideally, if we've got trust in that, we're more likely to rely on them. But ideally, certainly from my point of view, is you're more likely to contribute to improving the processes, more likely to be involved in that. And then it becomes a sort of reinforcing circle. So how do we actually go about building trust in our processes? So let's assume that we've mapped or documented a process. We've saved it somewhere where we know people can access it. What else can we do to, other than just making it available, what else can we do to encourage people to trust the information that's in those processes? Training. I don't want to stick it in front of them, but actually educate them about what's in there, how it works, and why it works the way it does.
It needs to be followed by everyone. You need to have the next person also trusting it. If Johnny doesn't trust it, why would I trust it? And in particular, if the other person is a manager, middle manager, someone higher up in the organization than you, so it doesn't answer the response how, but I think it's very important to think about all the hierarchical chain of the process, because losing trust, you just need to have a manager telling you, no, do it this way this time.
Yes, so what you're talking about is a sort of standardized way, making sure that it's a standardized way of doing it, because I could create a process and believe that's to be totally correct and I trust it, but actually it might not even fit or might not even work, and the next person looking at it might not trust it. But then I think the other thing you talked about there is that sort of accountability. So I want to know when I look at the process that somebody with the right expertise or skills or authority has somewhere along the line said, yes, this is the way we're going to do it. So even if the process isn't right or there's something wrong with it, but at least everyone's pulling in the same direction, so that when you find what's wrong with it, you can fix it and make sure that filters out to everyone.
So to me, the trust starts when you start creating the process. That's by involving the right person that themselves you trust. You trust the stakeholders, so you trust the process they produce.
I put a variety of things here. So first and foremost, it's got to be clear, easy to read. It's got to be produced in a consistent way. The process has to be accurate. So again, getting the right people involved, the subject matter experts, people that actually do the process. All of that needs to be done at that point of creation or documentation. So as you said, you're putting the foundations of that trust. So I'm not going to talk about that too much today, because that was really the core of the topic that I did 2 weeks ago on the sort of consistency and standardization and the importance of that in documenting your processes. But actually, some of the other points that I've got on here is really what I want to go into in a bit more detail today. So I talk about the control of information, and by that I mean, it's everything from, you don't want a situation where sort of just trying to find the process is difficult because it's stored in lots of different places. So it's very easy to lose control if you're sharing processes through different shared drives or emailing them backwards and forwards. So the first point of control is having a central place where people can go to get the processes. Then coming back to that accountability point of view. So if you're going to share processes with people, who is the person that signed off or approved those processes to say that they are correct at the time of creation or writing? And then there's things like change control or version management, where actually we know that processes are going to change over time, but we want to know that changes that have been made to the process have been done for the right reasons, or they might have been done for the wrong reasons, but they were perceived to be the right reasons at the time. But ultimately, what we want to do is that some sort of history of that change. So if things do go wrong in the future, we can look back and go, well, why did we make that decision? Because it may have made perfect sense at the time. So being able to understand why those changes. So it really comes down to things like version control of the processes, along with the correct approvals. Another one is part of engagement as well, because I've mentioned I've got feedback engagement, but I've talked about regular reviews and updates. And so some processes don't change very much and can go for quite long periods without change. So your version might not have changed for quite a long period of time. But the longer that period goes, you do also have this danger of somebody looking at that going, well, can I really trust this? Because on one hand, the process might not have changed. But on the other hand, someone might not be keeping this up to date. So having some sort of visible review process around that process, so even if it hasn't changed, people have been looking at it on a structured frequency to make sure that it's still fit for purpose. And there's evidence that that's happened. I also believe that reviews are quite important. So although I talk about feedback and engagement in the next point, trying to get people to feedback processes is quite hard. There'll be some people who will love to share their opinions on processes. So those people are not the ones that are hard to engage with. But others just don't really think of going and doing that. Whereas using structured reviews on a regular basis is a good way to influence that behavioral change. So putting the reviews in places and actually opening them out to more people is a good way of getting people to go back, provide their opinion, because you can specifically ask them to do that. But also just reminding them that the processes are there. Because again, if you know a process really well, you don't go into the office in the morning and go, right, I need to look at every process everything I'm going to go and do today, I need to go and look at the process, because most stuff you do regularly enough that you know how it works. You don't need to refer to the processes. But the danger of that is that you then get stuck in doing something a certain way and don't know about improvements and changes that have been made to it. So running regular reviews helps you keep the processes up to date. It helps to keep everybody aligned around best practices, and it reminds them that it's there and to do it. So I see those things as sort of going quite hand in hand together, the reviews and the feedback and engagement piece. So I mentioned this just before, but this sort of idea in industries where you're in a sort of highly regulated space, again, you're navigating, or people are navigating their roles and having to think about the impact or implications of rules and regulations. And so the clearer you can communicate that through within the process documentation, and their responsibilities with regard to compliance, the more they're going to trust the process. And again, in that environment, it goes back, if you're doing regular reviews and regularly updating the process, again, you're going to have more confidence that information's correct at the time you need to reference it. So what I'm going to do now is just very quickly go through some of the key ways we can do that in Skore. So I'm just going to touch on kind of 3 areas of functionality. We just talked about the reviews there, but the key points I've put here is publish early and often. So by publishing, we mean getting the process approved and published. So that puts it under version control. I'll take you through that in a second. Don't wait until the process is perfect, but at least do it so that it makes sense, it's readable, it's laid out well, and you've got most of the information available. Processes are never perfect and they change all the time. So just get something published and then improve it over time. Set up regular reviews, as I said, to help influence that behavior and encourage feedback. So we'll touch on that in a second, and then highlight the compliance points in the process in that compliance environment. And I'll show you an example of that. So let's just very quickly start with the publishing and go to a process here. So straight at the top, I can see the version of the process and I can see when it was published. So I did this latest version today to demonstrate it. So I can see straight away when this was last updated. So this one obviously within the last few hours. Now, another thing that I've done, which I see different teams doing slightly different ways, but in this example, I've highlighted the process owner on there. So what I've done in this process is, in order to publish this process, I myself have approved it. But in this case, I'd have used the process owner to approve the process. So again, it comes back to that point of showing, okay, I can see this is controlled, I can see it's been published recently, and I can see who it is who's most likely to have signed it off. So again, it's about sort of building that confidence and trust within the process. I can also go back and look at the history of the process. So if I go and click open the latest revision or editable revision, and here there's an option to look at the version history. So if I open that up, I can see there were 2 versions of this process. So I can see what was published last time, I can see what's published now, and I can also see what was changed on those. So in this latest version, we added the process owner to the field. So the change notes, ideally when you're publishing processes, you're filling in the change notes to explain why you're publishing this version now. Again, it's so that people can very easily go in and see, okay, what has changed, why has this changed, and why is it important to me? Another little thing that is a relatively new feature in the product that you may have seen is up here in the top next to where it says open the editable revision. We now show a list of participants. And if I hover over my mouse, you can see these are all example users I've put in myself. But there's a little configure option. And so I click on that. So participants in a process are people who will be, it's a bit like following the process. So if a change has been made to a process, they will get a notification to say that's happened. And you can go and configure that. You can add different people into that process or take people out. So again, you can start to think about, how do I communicate that changes have been made to the process too? So it's a useful recent addition to the product. So moving on to the review feature, again, I'm not going to deep dive into any of the features, just sort of highlighting them, but we've got previous recorded drop-ins that go into detail on these, or videos on our YouTube channel if you want to look at them in more detail. So just quickly touch on the review feature. So you access that on the left-hand panel, clicking process reviews. In my example here, my calendar is populated with reviews, so I can see I've got reviews that need to be closed, other reviews that are coming up in September, and then I can go into the future and see different reviews that I've got coming up. Like I've got a quarterly P2P review you can see comes up every 3 months. When a review comes up, the way the reviews work is that when you create a review, you can have 1 or more processes as part of that review. So as I mentioned before, you don't have to align a review with every single process. If you've got a logical group of processes that make sense to review together, you can create a single review and group all those processes together. When you set up a review, you set up what we call a review cycle. And so a review cycle is where you set up the parameters of that review. So what processes are involved, what participants are involved. And again, you can have one or more people involved in that. And then you can set that calendar. So you go, is this every month? Is it every quarter? Is it every 6 months? Whatever. You can project that into the future. When you set a review up, you get the option to make it a mandatory step that people have to sign off to say they've done the review, or you can use it simply as a reminder. And in both cases, what will happen is as the review approaches, the review date approaches, it will start sending messages out to those participants, reminding them that the review is coming up. When you open a review, so either through the email that you get into your inbox or clicking on the specific review from the calendar, you'll see that you get a set of instructions. This is what we're expecting you to do as part of this review. You'll be able to see which processes are included. In this case, I've just got one, which is produce and test product. But you can also see what other comments people have left. So if people have left comments against the processes, feedback comments, these will all be displayed here. But from there, you'd be able to then click on the process to open it up, and you'll be able to click to see what the comments are, or indeed add additional comments if you want to. I always say when you're building the instructions for the reviews, it's really important to be quite explicit about what you're asking people to do. So if you want your users to review the process and leave comments against it, say that very specifically in the review. If the intention is that actually you want people to go and look at the process and then you're going to run a separate live meeting to discuss it, again, make that very, very explicit in the instructions. And then the last thing I wanted to quickly touch on was about the sort of compliance points. So I'm just going to show you a quick example of where we've done that here. So here we've got some business control points that we wanted to highlight on the process. So here, this is a requisition process, so where we can raise a requisition to purchase something, and then it has different routes that determine how that will get approved. And the two approval steps here are both compliance points. What we've done is we've actually created a control form against those individual steps. That control form, we can describe what are the key components of that control against them. And here we've got things like review date, who it was reviewed by, who the owner of the control is. And you can see that the boxes are colored red. And so what we've done is used a style rule to say, okay, whenever I put one of these control points or compliance forms against a box, I want to automatically change the color of the border of the block box. And so what that does is it clearly highlights, for anyone reading the process, it clearly highlights that that's a key compliance point. And then when they click on the attachment, they can go and look at the form, and we can then just describe who's involved, what's involved in that control point. And as I said before, about the responsibilities on that. So as I said, just wanted to kind of highlight sort of three key features and so you can use to kind of really build that trust. So approvals and publishing to put processes under version control, reviews and commenting to get feedback and sort of start to influence that behavior of getting people to think about and review and update processes regularly, and then being able to sort of demonstrate compliance points on the processes that show people clearly what their role and responsibility is with regard to rules and regulations. As I said, we do deep dives into all of these features. You'll find videos on our YouTube channel, or if you want to learn more about any of them, just reach out to us and we can certainly help with that. On that note, thank you very much for coming along again today. And yeah, you know where to find us if you have any questions, and thank you very much.